The merciless Texas sun beat down on Samuel Clayton's weathered face as he guided his horse through the rocky canyon near the abandoned Esperanza trading post. The year was 1873, and the frontier was still a dangerous place, where a man's character was measured not by his words, but by his actions when no one was watching. Sam had been riding for 3 days straight, his water running low, when he heard something that made him pull up short on the reins. It was barely a whisper carried on the desert wind, but Sam's years as a Union cavalry officer had trained his ears to catch sounds that other men might miss. Somewhere among the scattered boulders and thorny mesquite bushes, someone was in trouble. He dismounted slowly, his boots crunching on the gravelly soil as he followed the sound. The trading post had been abandoned for months, ever since tensions between settlers and Apache bands had made business too risky for most traders. Behind a large outcropping of red sandstone, Sam found her. An Apache woman, probably no more than 25, sat propped against the rock with her left leg clearly injured. Her traditional deerskin dress was torn and stained with dried blood, and her long black hair hung loose around her shoulders. Despite her obvious pain, her dark eyes met his with fierce dignity rather than fear. This was no ordinary encounter in the borderlands of Texas. Sam raised his hands slowly to show he meant no harm, though he couldn't speak Apache, and she likely knew little English. The woman's breathing was labored, and he could see that her leg was badly swollen. In this heat, without water and medical attention, she wouldn't survive another day. Sam looked back at his horse, then at the woman, and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Without speaking, he walked back to his mount and began untying his water canteen, food supplies, and bedroll. The woman watched him with growing confusion and wariness. When he led the horse over to her and gently placed the reins near her hands, her eyes widened in disbelief. Sam gestured toward the horse, then toward the distant hills where Apache territory lay, making it clear he was giving her everything she needed to get home safely. The woman stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to understand what kind of white man would sacrifice his own survival for a stranger, especially one from a tribe that most settlers considered their enemy. Sam touched his hat brim respectfully, turned, and began walking toward the trading post on foot, leaving behind the horse that had been his most valuable possession and his best chance of surviving the harsh Texas wilderness. What Sam didn't know was that this woman, Ayanna, was the beloved daughter of Chief Nalnish, and that her father had already been tracking her for 2 days with a war party of 12 skilled Apache warriors. Chief Nalnish crouched beside the horse tracks in the sandy soil, reading the story written in the dust like words on a page. His weathered hands, marked by decades of life on the Texas frontier, traced the outline of unshod pony prints mixed with the deeper impressions of a shod cavalry horse. His daughter Ayanna had been missing for 3 days, taken during a raid on their camp by rival bandits who had fled when his warriors arrived. Now, following the trail through the unforgiving landscape of West Texas, he was close to answers. The 12 warriors who rode with him were among the finest trackers in their band. They had followed Ayanna's trail through rocky canyons and across windswept mesas, past ancient trading routes that connected the Rio Grande to the heart of Texas. The land here was harsh but familiar, dotted with prickly pear cactus and surrounded by distant purple mountains that shimmered in the afternoon heat. This was their ancestral territory, every waterhole and hidden canyon known to their people for generations. Standing up from the tracks, Chief Nalnish pointed toward the abandoned trading post visible in the distance. The trail led directly there, but something had changed. The horse tracks told a strange story that didn't make sense. According to the signs in the dust, his daughter had been on foot when she reached this place, but now there were clear impressions showing she had left on horseback, riding his own mount. Even more puzzling were the boot prints of a white man walking away from the scene on foot. The chief's lieutenant, a scarred warrior named Kuruk, rode up beside him and studied the tracks as well. In the Apache language, he whispered his interpretation of what they were seeing, but even he seemed confused by the evidence. No white settler would give up his horse to an Apache woman, especially not in this territory, where such an action would mean certain hardship and possible demise in the desert. Yet the tracks told no lies, and Chief Nalnish had learned long ago to trust what the earth revealed to those who knew how to listen. As they approached the trading post, the chief could see fresh footprints leading toward the adobe building. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty courtyard, where Mexican traders had once conducted business with both settlers and Apache bands during more peaceful times. Now the place stood empty, its wooden shutters hanging crooked and its well likely running dry. But smoke was rising from the chimney, and someone had clearly taken shelter inside. Chief Nalnish dismounted and walked slowly toward the building, his hand resting on the handle of his knife, not out of aggression but out of caution. Through a crack in the wooden door, he could see a figure moving inside, a white man with sandy brown hair and worn cavalry clothes. This had to be the man whose tracks led away from where they'd found evidence of his daughter's rescue. The chief took a deep breath and pushed open the door, ready to confront the stranger who had somehow saved Ayana's life. Inside, Sam Clayton looked up from the small fire he'd built in the stone hearth, his blue eyes meeting the intense gaze of the Apache chief. Neither man spoke for a moment, but both understood they were facing a moment that would determine not just their own fates, but the relationship between their peoples in this corner of Texas. The silence inside the abandoned trading post stretched like a taut bowstring between two very different worlds. Chief Nalnish stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the harsh Texas sunlight, while Sam Clayton remained by the small fire he'd built from old wooden crates and dried mesquite branches. Both men were studying each other with the careful attention of those who had learned that survival often depended on reading character in a stranger's face. Sam slowly stood up, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He had expected this moment ever since he'd given his horse to the wounded Apache woman 2 days ago. In his years on the frontier, he'd learned that every action had consequences, and helping Ayana had been a choice that could easily cost him his life. But looking at the chief's weathered face, marked by years of leadership and loss, Sam saw something he hadn't expected in the man's dark eyes. Instead of anger or the promise of retribution, there was curiosity, even a hint of respect. The chief stepped fully into the room, and Sam noticed the intricate beadwork on his buckskin shirt, the silver concho belt around his waist, and the eagle feather woven into his long gray-streaked hair. This was clearly a man of importance among his people, someone whose decisions carried weight and whose judgment would determine Sam's fate. But more importantly, Sam could see the unmistakable love of a father in the way the chief's entire posture had changed since entering the room. Without speaking, Chief Nalnish reached into a leather pouch at his side and withdrew something that made Sam's heart skip. It was his cavalry insignia, the brass buttons torn from his old Union coat that he'd packed in his saddlebags. Ayana must have found them among his supplies and given them to her father as proof of who had helped her. The chief held the buttons in his palm, studying them carefully, then looked back at Sam with an expression that seemed to be calculating something important. Sam realized this was a critical moment, not just for him but potentially for the relationship between settlers and the Apache bands in this region of Texas. The frontier was already filled with too much mistrust and misunderstanding between different groups of people trying to make lives for themselves in an unforgiving land. He slowly reached into his pocket and withdrew his own water-stained military discharge papers, the documents that proved he'd served with honor in the Union Army. He held them out to the chief, though he knew the man likely couldn't read English. Chief Nalnish took the papers and studied them carefully, running his fingers over the official seals and signatures. Then he did something that surprised Sam completely. He walked to the fireplace, held the papers over the flames for a moment as if considering burning them, then folded them carefully and handed them back. Instead, he reached to his own belt and removed a small carved piece of turquoise in the shape of a horse, a token that clearly held personal significance. The chief placed the turquoise horse in Sam's palm and pressed the white man's fingers closed around it. Then, using gestures and expressions that transcended language, he began to tell Sam a story. He pointed toward the hills where his daughter had returned safely, made motions indicating her injured leg was healing, and touched his own heart while looking directly into Sam's eyes. The message was clear. Ayana was not just alive but would recover fully, and her father understood the sacrifice Sam had made to save her. But then Chief Nalnish's expression grew serious, and he gestured toward the desert beyond the trading post, toward the territories where other Apache bands and Mexican raiders operated beyond his influence. With careful hand signals, He was trying to warn Sam about something important, something that would affect both their futures in ways neither man could yet imagine. The day, Nalnish walked to the window of the trading post and pointed toward a distant dust cloud rising against the Texas horizon. Through gestures and drawings sketched in the dirt floor, he began to explain to Sam Clayton why giving up his horse to save Ayanna had created both a debt of honor and a dangerous situation that extended far beyond their personal encounter. The dust cloud, the chief indicated, belonged to a group of Mexican raiders led by a man named Esteban Morales, who had been terrorizing both Apache camps and settler homesteads across this region of Texas. These weren't ordinary bandits looking for cattle or horses, but men driven by old grudges and the promise of gold from a recently discovered silver mine near the border. Morales had been the one who'd attacked the Apache camp and wounded Ayanna during her escape, and now he was tracking both her and any witnesses to his crimes. Sam understood the implications immediately. By helping Ayanna, he'd unknowingly become a target for Morales and his men, who couldn't afford to leave anyone alive who might identify them to either Apache warriors or Texas Rangers. But more than that, Sam realized that Chief Nalnish was here not just to thank him, but to warn him and offer protection. The Apache chief had read the situation clearly. A lone white man on foot in this territory wouldn't survive long against Morales, especially now that he'd been marked as an enemy. Using more dirt drawings and careful gestures, Chief Nalnish explained that Ayanna had told him everything about Sam's sacrifice. In Apache culture, such an act created bonds of obligation that couldn't be ignored. The chief had already sent word to other Apache bands in the region that this particular white man was under their protection, a decision that carried significant political implications for relationships between his people and the settlers moving into Texas. But Chief Nalnish had another proposal, one that he communicated through a combination of hand signs and by showing Sam a carefully drawn map in the dirt. There was a way to deal with Morales permanently, but it would require cooperation between Apache warriors and someone who understood both military tactics and the white man's world. The chief had spent days considering this plan, weighing the risks against the potential benefits for his people's safety. Sam studied the map drawn in the dirt, recognizing the terrain around an old mission, about 20 miles south where Morales and his men had reportedly made their temporary camp. The location was strategic, situated near both the silver mine and the main trails used by travelers between Mexico and Texas. If Morales could be stopped there, it would not only eliminate the immediate threat but also send a message to other raiders that this territory was protected by an alliance they hadn't expected. The chief reached into his leather pouch again and withdrew, something that made Sam's breath catch. It was a cavalry saber, his own saber that had been among his horse's equipment when he'd given it to Ayanna. But now the blade had been wrapped with strips of beaded leather in Apache patterns, creating something that symbolized both his military heritage and his new relationship with Nalnish's band. The chief was offering him not just a weapon, but a role in something larger than either of them. As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows of the abandoned trading post, Sam Clayton found himself facing a choice that would define not only his own future, but potentially the future of relationships between Apache bands and settlers in this corner of Texas. Chief Nalnish waited patiently for his decision, but both men could hear the sound of approaching hoofbeats from multiple riders, suggesting that time for discussion was running out. The dust cloud on the horizon was getting closer, and soon they would discover whether the approaching riders were friends, enemies, or something else entirely. The hoofbeats grew louder as Sam Clayton gripped the leather-wrapped saber and looked toward Chief Nalnish, who had already moved to the window to assess the approaching riders. But instead of the raiders they'd been expecting, 3 figures emerged from the heat shimmer of the Texas desert, and Sam's heart jumped when he recognized the lead rider. It was Ayanna, mounted on his own horse and accompanied by 2 Apache warriors, riding hard toward the trading post with news that would change everything. She dismounted swiftly despite her healing leg injury, her eyes bright with urgency, as she spoke rapidly to her father in their native language. Chief Nalnish's expression grew grave as he listened, and then he turned to Sam with hand gestures that conveyed troubling information. Morales and his raiders had learned about Sam's location and were riding toward the trading post with a force of nearly 20 men, planning to eliminate both the witness to their crimes and anyone who might be helping him. But Ayana had also brought something else, something that made her father nod with what appeared to be satisfaction mixed with concern. During her ride home, she had encountered a patrol of Texas Rangers who had been tracking Morales for weeks, following reports of attacks on both settler families and Apache camps throughout the region. When she'd managed to communicate Sam's situation to them using broken English and gestures, the Rangers had agreed to coordinate their efforts with Chief Nalnish's warriors. Sam realized he was witnessing something unprecedented in this part of Texas, a three-way alliance between Apache warriors, Texas Rangers, and a former Union cavalry officer, all united against a common enemy who threatened everyone trying to build lives on the frontier. The political implications were staggering, but more immediately, it meant they had a real chance of stopping Morales permanently. Chief Nalnish quickly outlined a battle plan using dirt drawings and gestures, showing how his warriors would position themselves in the rocks around the trading post while the Rangers approached from the south and Sam held the interior of the building. It was a coordinated strategy that relied on each group's particular strengths: the Apache's knowledge of the terrain and stealth tactics, the Rangers' firepower and legal authority, and Sam's military experience and understanding of defensive positions. As they prepared for the confrontation, Ayana approached Sam and spoke the first English words he'd heard from her. "Thank you," she said carefully, touching the neck of his horse that had carried her to safety. "My father says you have the heart of a warrior, but the soul of a peacemaker. He wishes to know if you will stay in our territory and help build trust between our peoples." Sam looked around at the faces surrounding him. Apache warriors preparing their weapons alongside their chief, knowing that this moment represented something much larger than a single battle. The old trading post where they stood had once been a place where different cultures met to exchange goods and ideas. Perhaps it could be again, but only if they survived what was coming and proved that cooperation was stronger than the hatred and fear that had divided the region for too long. The sound of many horses approaching from the west announced that Morales and his raiders were almost upon them. Chief Nalnish clasped Sam's shoulder in a gesture of respect and brotherhood, then melted into the rocks with his warriors, leaving Sam alone in the trading post with the weight of history and the hope of a better future, resting on the decisions he would make in the next few minutes. As Sam took his position by the window, watching the dust cloud of Morales' raiders grow larger against the vast Texas sky, he understood that his impulsive act of kindness toward a wounded Apache woman had led to something he never could have imagined: the possibility of peace, built on the foundation of mutual respect and shared courage in the face of common threats. The battle that was about to begin would determine not just their survival, but whether the bonds forged in this desert trading post could become the foundation for a new kind of relationship between peoples who had too often seen each other as enemies rather than potential allies in the ongoing challenge of taming the American frontier. The first shots rang out across the Texas desert like thunder rolling over the mesas, shattering the afternoon silence as Morales and his 20 raiders charged toward the trading post in a cloud of dust and fury. Sam Clayton pressed himself against the adobe wall inside the building, his heart pounding as bullets splintered the wooden shutters around him. Through a crack in the wall, he could see the Apache warriors moving like shadows among the rocks, their presence invisible to the attacking raiders, but reassuring. To Sam, who knew they were there, Chief Nalnish had positioned his men with the tactical brilliance of someone who had spent decades fighting on this unforgiving terrain. Every boulder, every patch of desert scrub, every depression in the rocky ground became part of their defensive strategy. The raiders, expecting to find only a lone white man holed up in an abandoned building, instead found themselves caught in a carefully orchestrated trap that used the landscape itself as a weapon. From his position, Sam could see Morales himself, a stocky man with a graying beard and cold eyes, shouting orders to his men as they tried to understand why their assault wasn't going as planned. The raider leader had built his reputation on overwhelming force and brutality, but here in the desert, he was facing opponents who knew every stone and shadow, who had turned the very ground into an ally. The sound of approaching hoofbeats from the south announced the arrival of the Texas Rangers. Led by Captain James Morrison, a weathered lawman who had been tracking Morales for months, the Rangers' arrival changed the entire dynamic of the battle, as the raiders suddenly found themselves caught between multiple forces with nowhere to retreat. The coordination between Apache warriors and Texas Rangers was unprecedented in this region, an alliance born of necessity but proving remarkably effective. Sam watched through the window as Ayanna, despite her father's obvious concerns about her safety, proved herself as skilled a warrior as any of the men. She moved between positions with fluid grace, her knowledge of the terrain allowing her to stay ahead of the raiders' desperate attempts to break free of the encirclement. The sight of her reminded Sam of why he'd made his original sacrifice and strengthened his resolve to see this fight through to its conclusion. As the battle raged around the trading post, Sam found himself thinking about the broader implications of what was happening. This wasn't just a fight against a band of raiders, but a test of whether different groups of people could work together despite their differences. The success of this alliance could determine the future of the entire region, showing that cooperation was possible even in a land where mistrust had been the rule for too long. The turning point came when Morales, realizing his position was hopeless, made a desperate charge directly toward the trading post where Sam waited. The raider leader had correctly identified that removing Sam would eliminate the witness to his crimes and potentially break the alliance that had trapped him. But as Morales burst through the door of the trading post, his gun drawn and murder in his eyes, he found himself facing not just one man, but the symbolic representative of a new way of thinking about frontier justice. Sam raised the leather-wrapped saber that Chief Nalnish had given him, and in that moment, the weapon represented more than just a tool of war. It embodied the union of different traditions, different peoples, and different approaches to solving the problems that plagued the Texas frontier. 3 months after the confrontation at the Esperanza trading post, Sam Clayton stood in the same spot where he had first encountered Ayanna. But now the scene before him would have been unimaginable to anyone who had known this region before. The abandoned trading post had been rebuilt and expanded, transforming into a thriving center of commerce, where Apache families, Mexican vaqueros, Texas settlers, and traveling merchants conducted business in an atmosphere of mutual respect and carefully maintained peace. The defeat of Morales and his raiders had sent a powerful message throughout the borderlands of Texas. Word had spread quickly that this territory was now protected by an unprecedented alliance between Chief Nalnish's Apache band and Captain Morrison's Texas Rangers, with Sam Clayton serving as a cultural liaison who helped bridge the communication gaps between the different groups. The silver mine that Morales had been trying to control was now operated as a cooperative venture. With profits shared among all the communities that helped protect and maintain it, Sam had accepted Chief Nalnish's invitation to stay in the region, building a small adobe house near the trading post where he could serve as a translator, mediator, and advisor for the various groups that now worked together. His military experience proved invaluable in organizing the cooperative defense arrangements, while his act of compassion toward Ayanna had earned him a level of trust that few white men had ever achieved. Among the Apache people, Ayanna had fully recovered from her injuries and had emerged as a key figure in the new arrangements, her ability to speak both Apache and English making her an essential bridge between the communities. She had also become something more to Sam than just the woman he had helped in the desert. Their friendship had grown into a deep mutual respect and affection that transcended the cultural boundaries that had once seemed insurmountable. The success of the Esperanza Trading Post Alliance had attracted attention from territorial officials and Washington politicians who were looking for ways to reduce frontier conflicts without resorting to the harsh military solutions that had failed so often in the past. Delegations had begun arriving to study how the cooperative arrangement worked, hoping to replicate its success in other troubled regions of the expanding American frontier. But Sam understood that the real test of their achievement wasn't the attention they were receiving or the economic prosperity they had created. It was visible in the small daily interactions he witnessed around the trading post. Apache children playing alongside Mexican and Anglo youngsters, former enemies sharing meals and stories, and most importantly, people from different backgrounds working together to solve practical problems like water rights, grazing territories, and protection from remaining outlaw bands. Chief Nalnish had become not just an ally, but a true friend, someone whose wisdom and leadership had taught Sam that strength could come from understanding rather than domination. The chief's vision of a frontier where different peoples could coexist while maintaining their distinct identities had proven not only possible but profitable for everyone involved. As Sam watched the sun set over the Texas landscape that had once seemed so hostile and unforgiving, he reflected on how a single moment of compassion in the desert had led to changes none of them could have predicted. The horse he had given to a wounded Apache woman had carried more than just one person to safety. It had carried the seeds of a new kind of frontier community, one built on the radical idea that former enemies could become partners in building something better than what had come before. The story that had begun with Samuel Clayton walking alone through the desert now continued, with dozens of families from different backgrounds working together to create a future where their children might grow up, seeing diversity as strength rather than threat. And at the heart of it all remained the simple truth that sometimes the smallest acts of human kindness can reshape entire worlds, one choice at a time.